The snow had been falling all morning, soft and steady at first, then heavier as the afternoon crept in. By the time Emily Parker pulled on her boots and buttoned her thick red coat, the world outside looked like a painting washed in white. She was only 9 years old, small for her age, with cheeks that flushed pink against the cold. In one hand, she clutched a woolen mitten, and with the other, she held the leash of Max, her aging German shepherd. Max had been with Emily since before she could remember. He was gray around the muzzle now, slower in his steps, but still full of loyalty that never wavered. He was her best friend, especially since her mother had passed away last winter. Her father worked long hours at the factory, and though he loved her dearly, he often came home so tired he barely had strength left to talk. That left Emily with long afternoons of quiet. Too much quiet for a girl her age, so she walked Max every day, no matter the weather. The storm had turned the neighborhood into something unrecognizable. Trees stood like silent statues under the heavy snow, fences were buried, and even the rooftops seemed to vanish into the thick white sky. Emily liked it that way. The snow muffled every sound, as if the whole town were holding its breath. Max plodded beside her, leaving big paw prints in the powder. She tossed a stick ahead, and though his joints ached, he dutifully chased after it. When he brought it back, his tail wagged with the same enthusiasm he had shown as a puppy. Emily laughed softly, her breath visible in the cold air. Then she saw it. At first, she thought it was a fallen tree lying across the path. But as they got closer, she realized it was a car. No, not just any car, a police cruiser. Its nose was buried deep into a snowbank, the windshield cracked in a spider web of lines, the headlights flickering weakly. The sight of it made Emily stop in her tracks. Max growled low in his throat, his ears pricking forward. He tugged at the leash, pulling her closer. Emily hesitated, her small hands trembling inside her mittens. Something about the car felt wrong. She swallowed hard and called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer came, only the whispers of the falling snow. Still, Max pressed on, sniffing the air, pulling her toward the driver's side. Emily's boots crunched over the icy ground as she followed, her heart thudding in her chest. When she finally peered through the broken glass, her stomach lurched. There was someone inside. A man slumped over the steering wheel, his police uniform torn at the shoulder. Blood had seeped across his chest and arm, stark against the dark fabric. His face was pale, lips tinged blue, and for a terrible moment, Emily thought he might be dead. Max barked sharply, breaking the silence. The man stirred, his head shifting slightly. His eyes fluttered open, dazed and clouded with pain. "Help," he rasped, his voice weak, almost carried away by the wind. Emily gasped, instinctively stepping back. She was just a little girl. What could she do? But then Max whined, pouring at the car door, as if urging her on. She looked at her dog, at those steady eyes that always seemed to know more than words could say. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. With trembling hands, she pulled at the door handle. It groaned, stiff with ice, but finally gave way. The officer slumped further, his weight nearly spilling out onto the snow. Emily cried out and caught his arm, though he was far too heavy for her small frame. Still, she managed to keep him upright. His badge caught the faint glow of the headlights. Officer Daniel Hayes. "You're hurt," Emily said softly, her voice breaking. He tried to speak, but only a pained groan came out. His breath fogged in the frigid air, shallow and uneven. Emily's panic rose. She had no phone, no way to call for help. The nearest houses were a good 15-minute walk away, and the storm was getting worse by the minute. Max barked again, sharp and urgent. He looked back toward the path that led to town, then back at Emily. "You want me to get help?" Emily whispered. But the thought of leaving the officer alone in the snow made her chest tighten. He looked so fragile, so close to slipping away. She thought of her mother, how helpless she had felt watching her grow weaker in the hospital bed. Emily had been too little then, unable to do anything but hold her hand. Not this time. She wouldn't stand by and do nothing again. "Stay with him, Max," she said firmly. "Guard him." "I'll run," Max whined, but then sat obediently by the officer's side, pressing close to him, as if to share his warmth. Emily turned and began to run, her boots sinking into the snow. Each breath burned her lungs, and the icy wind clawed at her face. But she kept going, driven by a determination far bigger than her small body. Emily's legs burned as she pushed through the snow. The wind whipped around her, biting her cheeks, but she didn't stop. She knew Officer Hayes didn't have much time. By the time she stumbled onto the main road, her lungs felt as though they might burst. She waved frantically as a pair of headlights cut through the storm. A pickup truck slowed, tires crunching over the snow until it stopped in front of her. The driver's window rolled down, revealing Mr. Thompson, an older man from 3 houses down. His eyes widened when he saw Emily, red-faced and gasping, in the middle of the road. "Emily, what on earth are you doing out here?" "You'll freeze!" She doubled over, catching her breath, then blurted out, "A police car, it crashed. There's an officer inside. He's bleeding, please, you have to come." The color drained from his face. "Where?" Emily pointed shakily toward the path behind her. Mr. Thompson didn't hesitate. He threw the truck into park, grabbed the heavy blanket from the seat beside him, and jumped out. "Get in the cab, Emily. Show me the way." She climbed in, her teeth chattering, and as soon as he started driving, she guided him back toward the woods. The truck's headlights lit up the snow, making the storm look even thicker. They couldn't drive far. The path was too narrow. So Mr. Thompson parked at the bend, and they both scrambled out. Max's barking guided them the rest of the way. Emily's heart leapt when she heard him, steady, loud, and determined. When they reached the wreck, Max was still pressed against Officer Hayes, his warm body shielding him from the cold. The officer's eyes fluttered open at the sound of approaching footsteps. "He's alive," Emily breathed, relief washing over her. Mr. Thompson crouched down quickly, assessing the damage. His hands were steady, but his brow furrowed deep. "He's lost a lot of blood. We need an ambulance right away." He pulled out his phone, shielding it from the wind as he dialed emergency services. Emily knelt beside Max, resting a hand on his back. "See? I told you we'd get help." Max gave a soft whine, then licked her mittened hand. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Emily helped tuck the blanket around Officer Hayes, holding it tightly in place while Mr. Thompson pressed against the wound to slow the bleeding. The officer tried to speak, but Mr. Thompson shook his head. "Save your strength, son. Help is coming." Finally, the distant wail of sirens cut through the storm. Emily's chest loosened at the sound. Flashing red and blue lights painted the snow as 2 ambulances and a police cruiser pulled up. Paramedics rushed forward, their voices brisk but calm, as they worked to transfer Officer Hayes onto a stretcher. Emily stepped back, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and pride. She watched as they lifted him into the ambulance, still wrapped in the blanket she and Mr. Thompson had placed around him. Just before the doors closed, the officer's gaze found hers. His lips moved, and though no sound came, Emily read it clearly. "Thank you." Her throat tightened, and she nodded, tears stinging her eyes. Max barked once, as if sealing the promise. Word of the rescue spread quickly. By the next morning, the story was in the local paper. Little girl and her dog, save officer in blizzard. Neighbors stopped Emily on the street to hug her, their eyes brimming with admiration. At school, teachers praised her courage, and her classmates, who often overlooked the quiet girl, suddenly saw her in a new light. But none of that mattered as much to Emily as visiting the hospital with her father and Max 2 days later. The blizzard had cleared, leaving the town sparkling under a cold, bright sun. She clutched Max's leash tightly as they walked through the wide halls that smelled faintly of antiseptic and winter coats. When they reached room 214, her father knocked gently on the door. A voice inside, stronger than she remembered, called, "Come in." Officer Hayes was sitting up in bed, his arm in a sling, his shoulder bandaged. but his face warm with life. He smiled when he saw her. "There's my hero," he said softly. Emily's cheeks flushed pink. I just found you, that's all." "You did more than that," he said, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You saved my life. You and your brave dog." Max wagged his tail and padded closer to the bed. Hayes reached out with his good hand to stroke the shepherd's head. "You kept me warm out there, didn't you, buddy? I owe you both more than I can ever repay." Emily's father cleared his throat, his own eyes suspiciously damp. "We're just glad you're all right, officer." Hayes nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "I crashed because I was trying to respond to a call in the storm. Lost control on the ice. If you hadn't found me when you did." His words trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the air. Emily reached out, placing her small hand on his. "But we did." Something in her voice, soft yet certain, made the room go quiet for a moment. Hayes gave her hand a gentle squeeze, and her father rested his on her shoulder, proud and humbled at once. From that day on, Emily was no longer just the quiet girl with the old dog. She was the child who had braved the storm, who had listened to her heart, and who had reminded the entire town what courage looked like. And Max, though older and slower, walked proudly by her side, his loyalty etched into every step. The town spoke of the pair often, their story retold at church gatherings, in shops, even in the schoolyard. People said it reminded them of the values that bound them all together: loyalty, compassion, and the truth that even the smallest among us could change a life forever. The snow melted eventually, but the memory of that storm never faded. It remained like a light in the cold, a reminder of what it meant to care for one another. The week after the storm, the little town was still digging itself out. Snowdrifts piled high against fences, icicles dangled from eaves like frozen daggers, and the river that cut through the valley was locked tight under a skin of white ice. But everywhere people went, one story lingered on their lips: the little girl, her faithful old dog, and the police officer who lived because of them. Emily didn't fully understand what it meant. When the mayor called her father on the phone and invited them to the town hall, she only knew that she was supposed to wear her clean dress, the blue one her grandmother had sent from Kentucky, and that Max was brushed until his fur shone. Her father beamed as he buttoned his own jacket, pride softening the lines of exhaustion on his face. The town hall was filled to the brim that evening. Elderly couples bundled in scarves, children perched on their parents' laps, shopkeepers with dust still on their sleeves. All had gathered, drawn by the story that had spread faster than the storm itself. The smell of coffee and wet coats mingled in the air, and the old wooden floor creaked under so many boots. Emily sat nervously in the front row, Max curled loyally at her feet. She could feel the weight of curious eyes on her, but she kept her gaze fixed on the floor, cheeks hot with shyness. Then the mayor stood, tapping the microphone until the room quieted. His voice was rich and steady, carrying easily across the hall. "We gather tonight not just to celebrate survival, but to honor courage. In the darkest hours of last week's blizzard, when the snow blinded and the cold threatened to take lives, a 9-year-old girl and her aging dog did something extraordinary. They found one of our own, Officer Daniel Hayes, trapped in his cruiser, bleeding and alone. Without a thought for herself, young Emily Parker ran through that storm to bring help. Because of her, and because of the steadfast loyalty of her dog Max, we still have Officer Hayes with us tonight." A ripple of applause broke out, soft at first, then swelling until the hall thundered with it. Emily's face turned crimson. She pressed her hands against her knees, wishing she could shrink into the chair. But Max lifted his head proudly and barked once, which only made the crowd cheer louder. Officer Hayes stepped forward then, his arm still in a sling, but his posture strong. He looked directly at Emily, and for a moment, the noise of the room faded away. His eyes held the same gratitude she'd seen in the ambulance. Deeper now, steadier. He raised a small wooden plaque the mayor had given him. "This isn't just a piece of wood," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a reminder of what we owe to each other. In my line of work, I've been taught that duty means protecting the community. But that night, a child and her dog reminded me that community also protects us. Emily? Max, thank you for giving me back my life. The hall stood as one, applause and cheers filling every corner. Emily glanced at her father, who nodded, his eyes glistening. Slowly she stood and gave a shy smile, her hand resting on Max's head. That was all. It was enough. Life eventually settled back into its ordinary rhythm. The snow melted, the days lengthened, and the routines of school and work filled the hours. But things weren't quite the same for Emily. At school, she found herself surrounded by children who wanted to hear the story again and again. What it was like to open that car door, what Officer Hayes had said, how Max had acted. At first, she blushed and shrugged, but over time, she began to see that her story wasn't just hers. It belonged to the town, a thread woven into their shared history. Officer Hayes visited often, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in jeans and a sweater, always with a smile and a treat for Max. He and Emily's father struck up a friendship, often sitting on the porch together, mugs of coffee in hand, talking long after the sun went down. For Emily, who had felt the silence of her home so keenly since her mother's passing, those evenings filled the air with something warmer than she had known in months. One night, as Emily sat on the steps scratching behind Max's ears, Hayes leaned over and said, "You know, Emily, you and Max taught me something out there. You taught me that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones in uniform or the ones with badges. Sometimes they're just the ones who don't give up, no matter how small they feel." Emily didn't know how to reply, so she just nodded and rested her head against Max's neck. His steady heartbeat under her cheek said more than words could. Years later, people in town still told the story of that storm. Children who hadn't even been born yet grew up hearing about the little girl, the old dog, and the officer who almost didn't make it. The memory became part of the town's fabric, retold at winter festivals and around kitchen tables. When the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, Emily grew older. Max passed on after a few more loyal years, and life carried her into new seasons. But every winter, when the snow came down heavy and the silence of the world grew thick, she remembered that night. She remembered the cold sting of fear, the pounding of her small heart, and the moment she realized that sometimes courage is just taking one step forward, when it would be easier to run away. And in those memories, Max was always there, steady, loyal, with eyes that never wavered. The storm had shaken the whole town, yes, but in its wake, it left something stronger. A reminder that heroes can be found in the unlikeliest of places, and that sometimes the smallest hands, guided by love and loyalty, hold the power to change everything.